So for step 1, charging the battery pack. Well, this step I'm not going to do just yet because we're going to need this for step 18 when we check to see if the servo is in neutral. And as I'm nowhere near ready for that, I'm going to skip step 1 and we'll wait. So we're going to move right into step 2, which is the differential gear. So you can see that we need to put this all together. So there are all of the pieces that we need for this step. And of course, there's our differential slash spur gear setup. And then of course, the piece that closes this all up. So I'll set this up and we'll put the differential gear together. So as you can see, we're going to grab our differential spur gear, and you can see that the piece that they want you to use is one of the large bevel gears, and they're showing you greasing it up. Now you can also see that there is a dark grayed area at the bottom, which tends to be they're wanting you to grease that outside ring that's down there. So what I'm going to do is I popped the top here on the grease that came in the kit, and of course often it'll just pop like all the stuff comes out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use some of this on the top of here for now, and then I'm going to use some of this now on the bottom of here so that we know that that's all greased up. And I always figure with this stuff, you know, don't go overboard, but put enough grease on it. Now with this, I'm just going to drop it right in place just like that, and then I'm going to make sure that the other areas are greased up as well. And there's enough on there just because obviously we're using what kind of popped out of there. Now you can see with the star, they're showing that they want the metal parts greased. So I'm just going to squeeze this out just a bit. Let's make sure that the star gets covered. Now before I switch to holding the other side, I'm going to slide that on. Slide that one on. Then I have these two that I can hold so I can grease up this last one. There we go. And we'll put that last star in there. Now what I find is the easiest thing to do in terms of greasing it all is just put this in. So you can see that there are marks here that this needs to slide into so that the shafts will fit in there just like that. And then what I like to do is just use this whole setup to grease the gears. So you're making sure you're getting enough on that one. I'm going to make sure we get enough on that one. And then enough on this one. And I mean, I'm not squeezing much grease out of this because I'm also moving it around, just making sure that everything is covered. So you can see that every part of the gear has grease on it. So that'll be good. And I mean, with this one, technically maybe you don't have to put some on because those gears will naturally grease it up as well. But I'm going to put a little bit on here, just like that. Not too much, but enough. And then we're going to slap that right on top, just like that. And you can see that that's more or less what it's going to look like. And then we've got to grease up the top of this. You can see here, just like that. So we got enough on top of there. And you can see that the 3 holes, you'd think, oh, well, that's where these 3 pronged pieces go, but that's not the case. It goes over the top of where you slid the star shaft into because these holes are for the screws. So we're going to make sure that that sits like that. And now the holes will line up for the screws. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab one of our screws here. And we'll grab our small screwdriver. And I'm just going to make sure that that's going in okay. Now what I like to do is make sure that all 3 screws are going in correctly before I tighten everything down. Because what you don't want is to tighten one all the way down and then maybe the plastic isn't quite aligned to the hole that you want, and then you're having to backtrack and undo everything just to tighten everything down. Now this feels pretty good now, so I'm going to screw these all the way in. And I'm kind of going around like a car tire, making sure that they're all seated properly before I screw any single screw in place. Now once it's done, and you can see here it says tighten in equal amounts. Well, that makes sense. But because they're tapping screws, as soon as I get to the end and it feels like, you know, you're at the end and you don't need to go any farther, I'll stop. So that feels pretty good. And I'm just going around making sure that it's still nice and tight and nothing's loose. But there we go. There is our differential put together. Now, before we move on to the next step, there is one thing I would suggest that you do, and that's go back into bag A, and you're going to grab our axle pieces right here. And the reason I would do that is you want to make sure that everything that you've put together inside of here is working correctly. Now, obviously, with them both in, I can go, forward and back, everything's fine. But to test the differential, you want to be able to hold one side and spin. And this is actually running really, really smooth. And I mean, I can go back and forth and everything sounds right if you listen. So I know that the differential is in there correctly, nothing is binding, everything's fine, because the last thing you'd want is if something was binding inside of here or it wasn't quite built right, and then you go ahead and do all the future steps of putting this all into the gearbox and it doesn't work, you'll have to take everything apart again. So I would just do that final test. But this is okay, everything's working fine, so step 2 is complete. So now we're going to move on to step 3 and attach the counter gear.